everyone, I'm Rebecca and welcome back to my channel. So today we are going to try to tackle a subject that has been probably the most requested topic on my channel, and that is sizing up patterns from gridded patterns. So basically sizing up something that is only one size on a gridded sheet of paper to your size. And honestly, it's a pretty involved topic and there are different methods that you can use. So I'm actually going to break this up into two videos. This one is going to be the first one, and this is going to be how to size up something just by increasing the measurements to your measurements. And so this works better with skirts and stuff like that, where you don't have a ton of fitting that you need to do, like on a bodice or a corset. So we are going to be doing this on a skirt today. We're going to be looking at an 1890s skirt and how to take that from a gridded pattern to your size. Now for today's demonstration, we are going to be using my favorite book, Period Costume for Stage and Screen. Again, I apologize for the fact that this book is out of print because it's like my Bible. It's so good. That said, what I'm going to be doing here, that will work with any sort of gridded pattern. So if you have one of the Janet Arnold books, the Patterns of Fashion books, or honestly, even something like Cut of Women's Clothes, where it's kind of on a grid, as in it shows you inches on the sides, even though the sheet itself isn't gridded, you can always make the grid. It's really annoying, and I don't know why they didn't just stick it on a grid. But there you go. So really anything like that, honestly, even a pattern diagram if it tells you the scale, but that does get a little bit trickier. So we're not actually going to tackle that in this video. It's just that you can use the same techniques. So let's go ahead and take a closer look at this book. Okay, so this is the pattern that we are going to be using, which is for a skirt from 1894 to 96. And the book says that it's made from a dress made in thick cream satin mounted onto a stiff lining. It's a good shape and features a double box pleat at the center back. The placket opening is under the pleat on the left back, and this skirt contains the front, which is cut on the fold, the side front, the side back, and the back, which is also cut on the fold. Now, the gridded patterns in this book are all that 1 square equals 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters. So I do prefer gridded patterns that have that sort of scale, but sometimes you will find things with other scales. For example, I believe that Isabella's book, as in Prior Attire, I believe that her book often has 1 square equals 2 inches. So you're going to want to have a measuring tape or some other sort of thing handy, particularly one that has like 16th inch measurements on it, but a lot of the measuring can actually come out of the gridded pattern on the book. Now, if you are using something like Cut of Women's Clothes where it doesn't have a grid, you're going to be relying exclusively on your measuring tape, so do keep that in mind. But first we have to determine how big the waist is if you made up this pattern just exactly as it stands. So we're going to count squares. Easy enough, right? Now make sure that you don't count areas like these darts, for example, that we have right in here, or areas that are pleated. So this is a little arrow that shows that the pleat starts here and goes to here, and for example, and then there are also other ones here on the back. So we don't want to count that because that's not in our waist measurement. You can write in your books if you want. That's honestly what I do, but I always recommend taking notes somewhere. So if you do want to make a photocopy of your book page first and you don't want to write in your book, go for it, but you're going to want to write this down because it's way easier if you write it on the page than if you take your notes elsewhere. Okay, so to begin with, we're going to look at the skirt front. And some of this we can kind of estimate too, like if it looks like it's about 1/2 square, we can count it as 1/2. So our skirt front here, which is on the fold, we have 1, 2, 3.5, 4.5 from over here, and this is like 1/4-ish here, so we're looking at like 4 3/4. Now most gridded patterns do not have seam allowances, so keep that in mind, that when you are making this up into your actual pattern for yourself, you are going to need to add whatever seam allowance you prefer. So this, though, we have at 4.75. So I'm going to write 4.75 at the top right here, and a little equals sign or a little equals arrow. And that's so that I know that that was the original and it's going to go to what we need it to be at. And remember, that was on the fold too. So really we're doing this as half, so this should make up into half your waist measurement, but just keep that in mind. So now we're gonna look at this second piece here, again, pinching out the darts. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and we've got 2 little bits here. Let's call this 4.5. So 4.5 equals. Now over here, we really don't have that much fabric in this because most of this is the dart. So we've got about 1, this is close to 1, and then we've got like half and a tiny, tiny bit. So that tiny bit can kind of make up this close to 1. So it's like 2, we'll say 2.5. So this back piece has almost no fabric that we're dealing with at all because it's a stacked box plate, that double box plate. So really we are looking at just over 1 inch. You could count it as 1.25 if you want to. Probably I'd say that's what to do because the line is not exactly straight on this. If you look down at the bottom right here, it's definitely more of like a 0.25, whereas if you look up here, it's almost on the line, even though it's on the fold. So we're gonna count that as 0.25, which means that this piece is 1.25. So now we need to put that all together and make sure to multiply it by 2. Apparently my camera cut out, but after adding all of these together and multiplying by 2, we got 26 inches. So now we know what we're starting with and we know what we need to get to, which in my case is 40 inches. So we need to add 14 inches to our pattern size, to our waist size here. So to do that, generally I look at, okay, how many seams are there? Because it's usually easiest to add to the edges of patterns. So we have 1, 2, 3 times 2 seams, so 6 seams. So if we added an inch to each seam, that's actually just 12 inches right there. An inch, I mean, to each side of each seam. That's 12 inches right there. So that's a really, really great place to start. And we just need 2 inches after that. So we might as well add 1/2 inch to the center front. So basically we're going to extend this line right here out by 1/2 inch. And you can go ahead and like draw your new lines in too, if that helps. Typically, I don't tend to draw like straight lines, but I might do an arrow. So it says 0.5 inches that way. This one, on the other hand, is going to be 1 inch that way. So all of our seams are getting 1 inch, 1 inch, and make sure you have a note somewhere that you need. I usually just put like plus SA, plus seam allowance. So plus SA to all pieces. And otherwise you just kind of mark your +1, +1, +1, and plus 0.5 over here. And then the thing that's more important to me is that I want to go ahead and tell myself what these measurements here at the top are now, because that just makes it easier for me. So this 4.75, we have added 1.5 to that. So we're looking at 6.25 now. And then this one we added 1 on each side, so that's 6.5. And this one was 1 on each side, so 4.5. And this one was 1.5, so we have 2.75. Then double check your math. Always double check your math, just to make sure that that works. So we have 6, 8, 9 plus 1, so 10 plus 10 is 20, and we've got to 40. So there we go. That was really easy to get to 40. Now, you also, what I recommend you next do is do the same sort of thing down here at the bottom, because when you go to draw your pattern out, I generally don't draw this onto pattern paper or anything like that, though of course you're more than welcome to. If it saves you just drawing it out on your fabric each time, please, if you have the access to large pattern paper, like the really large grid where one grid square actually equals 1 inch, please go ahead and draw these out and save them for later because that makes it nice and easy. But what I do is I go and look at the bottom and be like, okay, well, this is going to be this is going to be this. However, there is one more step to do before we do our bottom measurements, and that is we need to look at how much the length needs to be increased or decreased, because on a skirt like this, you're probably going to get some swing difference from these bias lines if your length is different. So let's just take a look at the center front right here and we'll count up our grids, see how much it was originally. 41.5 originally in our center front. Generally, I will just do the center front and the center back because we know that the middle pieces have to be somewhere in between that, and generally the back is longer than the front. Now, of course, our back piece here starts with halves, so that's just really annoying. So I'm going to put those two halves together at the end and count that as 1. Maybe this wasn't a good example because I feel like there's actually an error here. The back is only 41 inches, which means it's actually shorter than the front, and that is not a thing. Backs of skirts in the 1890s, or let's face it, are always longer than fronts of skirts. So we have 41, but we're going to be changing that real significantly. The front might not change that significantly. I'm going to double check my skirt front measurements and my approximate skirt back measurements. Now, I recommend taking these measurements over a petticoat. I'm not doing that right now for the sake of this video, so mine won't be exactly right, but I'm also not actually drafting out this skirt because I don't need an 1890 skirt right now. So if you do draft this out or any similar type of thing with a skirt, just make sure that you are taking into account your petticoat, bum pad, whatever you're wearing with it. Do keep that in mind. So checking mine, I want to have 45 inches in front, and without a bum pad, it's 48 inches in back. So we're just gonna say 49 inches because better safe than sorry. And then you do have to keep in mind that, again, none of these include seam allowances or even your hem allowance. So generally speaking, if you're looking at an 1890s skirt, you are going to have some sort of a facing in there. So you're really only gonna have a hem allowance of like 1/2 inch to 1 inch for the seam allowance. So just keep that in mind. I'm not going to be adding in seam allowances right now because everyone uses their own size. So I like to use 1/2 inch seam allowances. You might like 5/8 or 3/8 or what have you. Do what you want to do. But what I am going to do is I'm going to draw these lines out longer so that I know where they need to get to. So I literally just go in with the pencil and do that. So this one was 8 inches. And we're gonna call this bit 8 inches as well. It might wind up being less than that, but it might just be that. You don't have to be precise about it, but sketch in your line so that you know approximately where it's going. And then with these types of lines, I recommend using a ruler or some sort of straight edge. Since it's really small, I'm just going to use this tape measure. And you are going to line that up and continue that down. And now we have our piece for the back. I'm going to do the same thing with these other pieces. Since we have a difference here of about 4 inches, I'm just going to kind of add that incrementally. I think I will go ahead and add 1 inch in length here, 1.5 to this seam, and then 1.5 to this seam, and that will make up our difference. I have drawn in all of my lines, and now I recommend going across and knowing how far across each piece goes, because it will help you when you're laying out your fabric and seeing how things can tile around on your fabric. Keep in mind that when you're counting these dots here, they don't have your additions up here. So for example, I got 11 right here. I'm gonna move my 45 marker here because it actually is now in the way. So I got 11 here. I'm going to write 11 like I did before up at the top where I have 4.5 to 6.25. I'm now writing 11 down here, and that is going to increase that 1.5. So it's going to be 12.5. And we're gonna do that for all of these. All right, so we've done that increase for all of these now. If it helps your brain, you might want to take your numbers, your second numbers, and add your seam allowance at this point. So for example, my 13.25, that's gonna be 14.25 after seam allowance, 26 is going to 27, 29 is going to 30. So you might wanna go ahead and do that both at the bottom and also up at the top. Just put all your numbers with your seam allowance in so that you know what you're doing. But at this point, now that we have our pattern, it's pretty easy to transfer all of these measurements to your fabric itself, as long as you have some nice long rulers. For example, sometimes I will take my 36-inch ruler and I will add a 25-inch ruler to the bottom of it. So plastic rulers are your friend. Just stick them together and you can get some of these really nice big measurements like that. And by the way, when I am tracing these out onto my fabric, I will use the measurements that I've taken here. So this measurement, this, which by the way, you might want to write down these numbers also. I know we didn't actually write them into the book, but you might want to write down your length measurements on each seam, just so you have that. It's probably a good idea. I can get it by doing the math of what we've done, but yeah, you might as well just make your life easier, count them and write them down, because when you're drawing out your fabric, you are going to count the measurement down and count the measurement out and count the measurement out here, and that's how you're going to get that line that is your bias seam line. So yeah, that's really it. Like at this point, I have enough information that I can go and I can cut my skirt. I generally wind up keeping the dart and such the same as what they have in the book, unless of course it doesn't fit right, at which point I just make my darts fit me. And same with the pleats. I generally keep those the same as what they have in the book. But by increasing the width of the bottom, for example, this skirt width is going to look better on me as a taller person to have that little bit more skirt width and have my skirt swing out that way. And one other thing that you might want to do if you are doing all of this not in your actual book, if you've done a photocopy, you might want to do things like once you have drawn out your skirt and once you've done your math and are confident about it, you might want to copy over those in different colored pens so that you can tell, okay, well, this is the line for this piece, this is the line for this piece, this is the line for this piece, and they don't blend together since they're all overlapped like this. So you might want to do that with different colored pens, and that way you also know the pencil doesn't pop very much, obviously, as you can see. That way you can easily see all of your numbers. But that's it. It's easy as that. So a little more complicated when you're working with things that need to fit in more places than just your waist. But when it's just your waist and your height, that's all you gotta do. So I hope that that was helpful for you, that it at least gave you a jumping off point to see how to do this. Again, I know that with skirts today, we were really only looking at the waist measurement, but you can use the same sort of technique to apply to really anything. It's just that you have to be looking at multiple measurements at a time and increasing, you know, maybe more to the bust than you would to the waist or vice versa. So it does get a little complicated when you're doing that. And that is why we are breaking this topic up into 2 videos. So in about a month or so, I'm going to tackle bodices and or corsets, because really it's the same sort of thing for either of them. And we're going to be looking at how to size up a bodice or corset pattern from a gridded pattern as well. And I will show you for that one 2 different methods that you can use to do that sizing up. You can do similar to what we did today, or you can do an entirely different method that I will talk about in that video. So I do hope that you enjoyed this. If you like this video, please go ahead and click the thumbs up icon. And if you'd like to see more videos like this from me, please go ahead and click subscribe and the little bell icon to be notified every time I post a new video. I do post videos here on YouTube twice a week. week, with my sewing vlogs out on Tuesday and other costuming content like this out on Saturdays. But I post every day over on my Instagram, so please go follow me on Instagram. That's at Lady Rebecca Fashions. And if you'd like to help support all of the work that I do on this channel, I do have a link to my Patreon and my Ko-fi accounts down below. And I'd like to give a special shout out to my Edwardian level patron, Heidi. Thank you all so much for joining me this week. Have a wonderful week, and I will see you very soon in my next video. Happy sewing!